moving away from collectivist discipleship onto patron-client discipleship. These are some of the things that we noted, and I want to ask discipleship questions in relation to them. If you are the patron, for those you disciple, it's anticipated you're going to provide protection, perhaps from spiritual enemies, perhaps from physical enemies, access to resources or information, scriptural information, books that would help them dig more deeply into Scripture, perhaps online resources. They center their identity on being associated with you. Remember, we talked about in large power distance settings, a guru. Well, this will be a frame of reference here. It can be a challenge, especially for a Westerner, to know how to do that with a servant's heart. Because you'll be accorded every respect as the leader of the group. And it's anticipated you will lead in a way that makes sense to them, not in a way that makes sense to you. Opportunities for ministry or other advancement and perhaps gifts or favors to them, but they will bring gifts as well too. You might not think of gifts as a part of discipleship, but building up relationship through reciprocal gifts is a big part of how people relate to each other in many parts of the world. I haven't seen as much of this lately, but early in my time here at Wheaton, it was not unusual, especially for Asian students, either at the beginning or the end of the semester, they would bring me a small gift. And it wasn't so that they could get a better grade. It was simply intended to convey, we have a relationship. You are my teacher. I respect you, and one of the ways I respect you is giving you a grade. I've mentioned several times a Korean ministry that I went and ministered to, and have served as a patron on this side of the ocean and more of a client on that side of the ocean for them. But I went with my family to an Asian restaurant down in Naperville, a suburb just south of Wheaton, and one of the staff members of this organization saw me there. And he told me later in a course, because he was taking a course as a student, he told me later in the class that his children stopped him from going over and paying for my meal bill. Because seeing me there, he felt he had a definite obligation to me as a patron, and one of the ways of building up this reciprocity would be to pay for my meal. His children, who had been born and raised in the United States, were horrified at the idea that Dad would go and pay for this stranger's meal and the stranger's family meal. And frankly, I'm glad he didn't. It would have been an interesting challenge for me to negotiate with my family to find out that he had chosen to pay for us and to deal with kind of the emotional shock that would have been part of that. The client provides labor, income, public acclaim, support, ministry allegiance, and support against the patron's competitors. Again, these are the same points we made when we looked at patron-client as a whole, but now I'm asking you to think through those in terms of discipleship. Next, we come to external locus of control discipleship. This sounds like large power distance. The disciples want the spiritual leader to initiate communication and outline paths to follow. It's interesting to think, again, of devotional times in this setting. If your external locus of control, who controls the environment for you to have a quiet time? Perhaps you go somewhere and have a quiet time together. Perhaps you do it in a one-on-one setting. Perhaps you do it in a group setting. The leader, the discipler, or the ministry are responsible to ensure that the social settings for the disciples are safe. So this same group has something they call marriage by faith. And in this practice, if I have been discipling you, let me describe this a little bit. The architecture of their main headquarters in Korea was fascinating. It was a room about the size of this room. It would seat maybe 40 or 50 people. But instead of having long tables, they had very small tables. They were maybe 2 feet square, and then they just have one chair on either side. And the way discipleship took place, every week, people in the ministry would journal. It was a type of inductive Bible study that they referred to as a sogam, and they called it a testimony. Testimony is not the best English word for it. It's a personal reflection. And there was a passage that everyone in the organization would reflect on. And they would all reflect on it, writing out, okay, what does it say? What does it teach? What sins in my life are shown, and what am I going to do about it? And then as the discipleship process, they would sit down with their mentor. They always wrote 3 to 5 pages and do this at least 3 times a week. Then they would sit down with their mentor, and one-on-one the mentor would go through word by word this sogam and critique them for it. I asked one person, have you ever been told this is a really good one? And the answer is no. He'd been in the ministry for 20 years. I said, do you ever anticipate you will be told this is good? No, there will always be things that are wrong with it. That's just the part of the framing there. That's how you discipline people. That's how you cause them to grow. People who have been involved in this ministry, and I've asked several of them at 10, 15, 20 years, they'll have thousands of pages of inductive Bible study that they've gone through. I don't know any other organization in which its people would have that kind of a track record of digging into the scriptures. Whatever you think of the discipleship method, they're digging into the scriptures. And in terms of marriage by faith, then, if I've been with this person, I've been discipling them for several years in this very intense, several times a week, one-on-one ministry setting. I'm going to church with them. I'm meeting with them at various times of the week as well, too. I know them quite well. And in traditional Korea, marriages are arranged. And so one of the ways they have adapted this somewhat is your discipler will be in touch with disciplers on the female side, and they might say, I wonder if so-and-so and so-and-so would make a good match. And if they think you would make a good match, then they'll arrange for the two of you to meet, knowing that you're meeting for the purpose of deciding whether or not you want to get married. How's that for not even a first date, but the first time you're meeting somebody? And one of the U.S. directors told me that he met his wife, and then they got married 3 days later. In large part because the disciplers do not want to make mistakes. They're not looking to put two people together who would be incompatible with each other. They're looking to put two people together who would be compatible with each other. By the way, it's interesting, they have more cross-cultural marriages than any group I know of, because they're not always convinced that the right person is the person of the same culture that you are. They've got a lot of Korean and American, Korean and German, Korean and Honduran marriages in their group. And so for me, it's at a very low divorce rate for the group as a whole. Because the atmosphere is framed in that direction for them. So you can see this as a type of discipleship that doesn't make much sense on an American college campus. And yet they're active on American college campuses, and they're, at times they've been struggling with knowing how best to reach American students. Well, arranged marriages are probably not the best way to help reach American students. And sometimes if the disciples are put in circumstances that are bad, if it's an external locus of control, it might not be seen as the disciples' fault if they engage in misbehavior in those settings because the circumstances were bad. It might even fall back on the leader who didn't provide for the good circumstances for the person. How about discipleship in honor-framed settings? In an honor-framed setting, you never want the person discipling you to lose face. You don't criticize them. You don't contradict them in public, because that's a loss of face for them. You don't say no to them if they give you a request, because that's making them lose face as well, too. You find indirect ways to say no. If you're going to do that, you especially don't say it directly. You might say yes and not do what they ask you to do, but you'd have to be very careful to do that in an honor-framed setting. And if you do it in a way that makes them lose face, you will be disciplined as a result. And the excellence of learning is understood to be directly related to the excellence of the leader. If your disciple is not learning well, then you're the one that's the problem. Lastly, older spiritual leaders will be more respected than younger spiritual leaders. I saw this in Africa on a regular basis where I needed white hair. My students, I was younger than many of my students when I taught in the seminary there, but I had more education than they did. And so in one side, Moreau was not always an easy name for them to pronounce because R's and L's are parallel in the languages of the places where I taught. So instead of calling me Dr. Moreau, I had many call me Dr. Scott, especially those who were older than I was. And it was an element of respect with the title, but also a reminder I was younger than they were with using my given name by what they called me in